On October 17, 2025, President Donald Trump welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House. This was an important meeting. It was the fourth time the two leaders met in person since President Trump began his second term in January. This gathering showed how delicate the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine was. It also showed that the future of the war in Ukraine was still uncertain. This conflict is one of the most serious wars of the 21st century. Many people hoped this meeting could bring some clarity or a way forward. The meeting happened in the White House's Cabinet Room. They shared a working lunch. The timing of this meeting was very special. It took place just one day after President Trump had a long phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That phone call lasted for 2 hours. During their conversation, President Trump and President Putin agreed to meet face-to-face very soon. This next meeting would be held in Budapest, a city in Hungary. This made President Zelensky's visit to Washington even more critical. President Trump had made a big promise during his 2024 election campaign. He often told people he would end the war in Ukraine very quickly, even in just a few days, if he became president again. However, after 9 months in office, his efforts for peace had not yet brought much success. Ending this war was proving much harder than expected. President Trump had recently helped to create a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. He hoped this success would give him good momentum to solve the war in Ukraine too. The situation in Ukraine was still very difficult. The war continued to cause much suffering. The meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky in Washington was a key moment. It showed the world the complex way President Trump was trying to bring the conflict to an end. People everywhere were watching to see if a real step towards peace could be made. The future of Ukraine and the lives of many depended on these important talks. Everyone hoped for a positive outcome, even though peace seemed far away. 2. A special weapon. President Volodymyr Zelensky came to the White House with a very important request. For President Donald Trump, he asked for a special and powerful weapon, Tomahawk cruise missiles. These missiles are known to be advanced and very effective. They can fly an incredibly long distance, reaching targets up to 2,400 kilometers, which is about 1,500 miles, inside enemy territory. The Tomahawk missiles are difficult for defenses to stop. They move at high speeds, around 885 kilometers per hour, and fly very low, usually only 30 to 90 meters above the ground. This low altitude makes them hard to detect with radar and intercept. They use special engines and guidance systems to hit their targets, precisely, making them a significant threat. Ukraine believes these missiles could change the war. President Zelensky has often said that the ability to strike deep inside Russia is key. Ukraine wants to target places like oil refineries, important energy centers, and military production factories. By doing this, Ukraine hopes to make the war much more costly for Moscow. Zelensky thinks that this pressure could force Russian President Vladimir Putin to start serious talks for peace. He has even called these attacks our long-range Ukrainian sanctions capabilities, showing how they are like economic punishments for Russia's valuable oil sector, which pays for the war. However, President Trump's reaction to this plea was not clear. During the meeting, he seemed unwilling to provide the missiles. Trump said, "They're very good, but we need them too, so I don't know what we can do about that." This showed his worry about giving away such strong weapons. Trump became even more careful after his private phone call with President Putin, which happened just one day before the meeting with Zelensky. During that call, Trump had talked about the Tomahawks with Putin. He later shared, "I asked him how he would feel if I sold them to Ukraine." Putin's answer was clear. He didn't like the idea. This made Trump's decision even harder. He had to weigh Ukraine's urgent need for powerful weapons against Russia's strong objections and his own concerns. Giving Ukraine Tomahawks would be a very big step, and Trump was thinking carefully about the serious results. 3. A difficult past. The meeting between President Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky on October 17, 2025, was polite and friendly, but their last meeting was very different. It happened on February 28, 2025, in the Oval Office. That time, the meeting was very difficult and even angry. Many people watched it live on television. During that meeting, President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance were very critical of President Zelensky. They spoke loudly, and sometimes President Zelensky could not be heard well. President Trump did not like what President Zelensky was wearing. President Zelensky wore his usual military-style clothes. President Trump said these clothes were not right for a visit to the White House. The conversation became a big argument. President Trump accused President Zelensky of taking big risks, saying he was gambling with World War III. After this, President Zelensky was asked to leave the White House. Many allies of America and many politicians in the United States supported President Zelensky. After this difficult meeting, President Trump wrote about it on Truth Social, a social media platform. He said President Zelensky had disrespected the United States of America. He also wrote that President Zelensky could come back when he is ready for peace. For about 1 week after this, the U.S. government stopped giving military help to Ukraine. They started helping again only after President Zelensky agreed to a temporary ceasefire, but Russia did not agree to it. The relationship was already difficult even before that Oval Office meeting. On February 19, 2025, President Trump had called President Zelensky a dictator without elections on Truth Social. President Trump said that President Zelensky had done a terrible job and that many people had died in Ukraine. Ukraine had postponed elections because of the war, which is allowed by their laws during wartime. But this new meeting in October was much better. The atmosphere was friendly. President Zelensky congratulated President Trump for helping to stop the fighting in Gaza. He said that President Trump now had a good chance to end the war in Ukraine. President Trump also complimented President Zelensky. He noticed President Zelensky wore a dark suit jacket over his shirt. President Trump said, "I think he looks fantastic in this jacket. It's beautiful. I hope people notice. It's very stylish." This showed a big change from their past difficult times. 4. The Alaska meeting. President Donald Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15, 2025. The meeting took place at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage. It was planned to discuss peace for the war in Ukraine. The meeting started with a warm welcome from President Trump. When President Putin arrived, President Trump was waiting on a red carpet. He clapped and shook President Putin's hand, and they shared smiles. President Putin decided to ride in President Trump's special armored car, known as the Beast, instead of his own car. Pictures of American servicemen rolling out a red carpet for President Putin were shared widely. This warm greeting drew criticism from many countries that supported Ukraine. They did not like how friendly the start of the meeting looked. President Trump had said that many important points were agreed upon, but the meeting did not go as well as he had hoped. It was meant to last for about 7 hours, but it ended in less than 3 hours. After the talks, neither leader spoke to reporters. President Putin stated Russia wanted to end the war, but he also stressed that the root causes of the conflict must be fixed. This was his way of talking about Russia's long-held worries about NATO growing and Ukraine moving closer to the West. During the meeting, President Putin gave a very long history lesson. He used this lesson to try and explain why Russia was fighting in Ukraine. He spoke about Russia's history, including leaders from long ago, like Rurik of Novgorod and Yaroslav the Wise. President Putin often used these historical stories to say that Russia and Ukraine are really one nation, and that Ukraine should not be a country by itself. This long explanation made President Trump very angry. Reports from people close to the meeting said President Trump raised his voice many times. At one point, he even threatened to leave. Because of this, President Trump cut the meeting short. He also canceled a planned lunch where larger groups from both countries would have talked about improving trade and money ties. The meeting ended without any agreement between the two leaders. The failure of the Alaska summit was an important moment for President Trump's ideas about Russia. In the weeks after the meeting, President Trump became more frustrated with President Putin. Putin still did not agree to a ceasefire and did not want to meet directly with President Zelensky. By September, President Trump changed his public view. He began to express belief that Ukraine could reclaim all of Ukraine in its original form. This was a different message from his earlier ideas that Ukraine might need to give up some land. 5. A new plan in Budapest. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to meet again. This new meeting will be in Budapest, Hungary. They talked on the phone one day before President Trump met with Ukrainian President Zelensky. During that call, they agreed to meet in the coming weeks. This decision surprised many countries in Europe. Many observers did not expect a second meeting between the two leaders so soon. It also made some European allies worried. Hungary's leader, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, welcomed the news. He said Hungary was ready to host the meeting. Hungary is a country in Europe and a member of NATO. Some people found it strange that a European Union country would host President Putin, who has legal issues from an international court. However, Hungary stated it would ensure President Putin could come and go safely. The U.S. government is changing its ideas about how to end the war in Ukraine. It had tried different ways, but the war continued. Secretary of State Marco Rubio now believes that Ukraine might need to make some agreements about land for the war to end. He said this is important to stop more suffering. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also changed his mind. He first seemed less interested in Europe, but now he says the United States will be tougher on Russia. He warned that if peace does not come soon, the U.S. will make Russia pay a price. A key part of this new plan is for Europe to help Ukraine more. Vice President J.D. Vance has often said that Europe should take the main role in helping Ukraine. President Trump's government wants European countries to buy more weapons for Ukraine. There is a new program called PEARL, which means European allies buy weapons from American supplies for Ukraine. This way, European countries pay for the weapons, not American taxpayers. This change shows how the U.S. wants Europe to do more for its own security. 6. The war goes on. Even as leaders talked about peace, the war in Ukraine continued. Many people were still dying every day. The fighting brought great sadness and high costs. Figures showed that many soldiers from both sides were killed or hurt. In just 1 month, Russia lost about 1,000 soldiers each day. For Ukraine, the number of dead and injured was also very high. The United Nations reported that more than 200 civilians died in September alone. Almost 1,000 more were hurt. This showed that the war was still very violent. Almost every day, people died or were hurt, especially near the battle lines. Russia kept attacking Ukrainian cities. They especially targeted power stations and other key buildings as winter came. On the night of October 16, Russia launched a huge attack. They used over 300 drones and many missiles. These attacks hit places all over Ukraine. About 70,000 people lost electricity. Gas and water services also stopped in 8 regions. President Zelensky said that Russians were attacking energy buildings every day in the autumn. Ukrainian officials said Russia had damaged many port buildings and 20 foreign ships. Gas networks were hit many times in October. These attacks meant that Ukraine had to turn off power in many areas. This was the 4th winter with such blackouts since the war started. But Ukrainian soldiers were fighting back. They had some good wins in recent weeks. President Zelensky announced on October 12 that Ukrainian forces had gained ground. This happened in the southern Zaporizhia region and the Donetsk region. For example, Ukraine's 24th Separate Assault Battalion worked with another unit. They freed a village called Mali Sherbaki in Zaporizhia. They moved forward 3.5 kilometers and took many Russian prisoners. This was the first major Ukrainian advance in that area for months. Military experts said that Ukraine was using new and better ways to fight. They now had special assault groups. These groups could quickly break through Russian defenses. Commander Oleksandr Syrsky said that Ukrainian forces had stopped Russia's big attacks in spring and summer. He also said that Ukraine was now making its own attacks in some places. In Donetsk, Ukrainian forces pushed back Russian soldiers who had moved forward near the city of Pokrovsk. These wins showed that Ukraine could still fight well, and Russia could not easily win the war. 7. Help from other countries. America has many friends in Europe who are helping Ukraine. These countries are working together to support Ukraine's defense. A key way they help is by buying American weapons. These weapons are then given to Ukraine to use in the war. This special plan is called the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, or PEARL. Under this plan, European countries pay for military equipment from U.S. stockpiles. This means American taxpayers do not have to pay for these specific weapons. Many nations have joined this effort. 8 NATO countries, including Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Germany, Latvia, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden first participated. Later, 10 more countries joined the program. This shows a big effort from America's allies to make sure Ukraine gets the military support it needs. The United States' own position on Russia has also become stronger. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had earlier shown some doubt about U.S. support for Europe. He even briefly stopped U.S. military aid for Ukraine at one point. But in October 2025, Secretary Hegseth showed a big change in his public message. He spoke at a NATO meeting in Brussels. There, he made clear the U.S. would be tougher on Russia. He warned that if peace did not come soon, the United States, with its allies, would impose costs on Russia for its actions. Secretary Hegseth also promised that firepower was coming for Ukraine, though he did not say if this included the powerful Tomahawk missiles Ukraine wanted. Despite these efforts from European friends and the tougher words from the U.S., the total amount of military help for Ukraine has actually decreased. A group that tracks aid, called the Kiel Institute, reported this decline. They found that military assistance to Ukraine fell by 43% in July and August 2025. This was a big drop compared to the first 6 months of the year. Even when counting the money Europe spent on American weapons through the PEARL plan, the total military help from European countries went down by 57%. This decrease in overall support is a concern. It comes at a difficult time as fighting continues and Russia attacks more Ukrainian cities and vital power stations. 8. The final choice. President Donald Trump and President Zelensky met at a very important time. This meeting in October could decide many things for the future of Ukraine. The war might stop with a peace deal, or it could go on for a very long time, bringing more suffering. President Trump had often promised to end the war quickly since he returned to office. He wanted to make a deal that would bring peace to the region. However, the situation was very complex and hard to solve. It was not a simple problem to fix. Just one day before meeting Zelensky, President Trump had talked to Russian President Putin on the phone. They agreed to meet again soon in Budapest, Hungary. Putin still had strong demands. These demands included keeping Ukrainian land that Russia had taken. He also wanted Ukraine to stay out of Western alliances. This made it very hard for Ukraine to agree to any peace deal without losing its freedom. Putin had also shown in past talks that he might not easily keep his promises. So the choice was very difficult for President Trump. Would he push Ukraine to accept a deal that might leave parts of its land with Russia? Or would he continue to support Ukraine's fight for its full land, even if it meant the war would last longer? The future of Ukraine and peace in Europe depended greatly on what decisions were made. The international rules about countries keeping their land were also at stake. Ukraine had made an urgent request for special American weapons called Tomahawk missiles. These powerful missiles could fly very far and hit targets deep inside Russian territory. President Zelensky believed these weapons would make Russia understand the high cost of the war and push them to negotiate seriously. But President Trump was not sure about giving these missiles. He said that America needed them too. He also mentioned that when he asked Putin how he would feel about it, Putin didn't like the idea. This showed how difficult the choice was for Trump. He had to consider many things: what was best for America, for Ukraine, for peace, and how Russia would react. This meeting marked a critical point. President Trump faced a final choice that would shape history for many years. Do you think Trump should give the Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.